You're told that Christmas has a certain scent, a fragrance of comfort, of security, a break from the harshness of life. At our house, it was the mix of warm cinnamon bubbling away on the stovetop, the crisp, bracing smell of the balsam fir that stood in our living room, and the savory, greasy perfume of the honey-baked ham my father, Robert, had to have every single year. I'd purchased that ham. I'd paid for the tree, the cinnamon, and the power that kept the tiny white lights twinkling on its needles. I'd paid for all of it. This was a truth I knew, and a truth they knew, but it was a fact that was never, ever spoken. It was the very bedrock of our family dynamic, the silent beam supporting the whole structure, and we all just pretended we couldn't feel the floorboards groaning under its weight. Tonight, the quiet around the dinner table felt different. It wasn't the typical worn-out silence that follows a long week. It was thick, stretched thin. My mother, Susan, was just nudging her vegetables around her plate, a little pile of green beans making a slow journey from one side to the other. My younger sister, Sophie, who was 18 and existed in a universe of social media alerts and teenage angst, was glued to her phone beneath the table, a transgression my father usually despised, but seemed to be ignoring completely this evening. I ate my dinner, every mouthful tasting like dust and obligation. I'd worked a 16-hour shift at the hospital to ensure I had enough cash for the presents sitting under the tree and this exact meal on our plates. I was 25 years old, and the only thing I felt was the profound weariness of someone who had lived twice as long. I watched my father carve his portion of ham. His motions were aggressive, the knife scraping and screeching against the porcelain. He had barely spoken to me all day. I was accustomed to his moods, the way they could descend upon the house like a weather system. But this felt new. This was the ominous calm after the lightning strike, and I was just bracing for the thunder to roll in. Finally, he slammed his fork down. It clattered on the plate, a sound so jarring in the quiet that Sophie physically jumped and finally looked up from her screen. My mother winced. Robert stared straight at me, his eyes empty and cold. The festive glow from the tree's lights shimmered in his graying hair, but his face held no warmth. It held nothing at all. "You're a liability, Clara," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air like a razor. "You need to leave. You can't live here anymore." The words felt disconnected from reality. They just hung there in the space between us, dense and foul, souring the smell of cinnamon. A liability. The word ricocheted inside my skull. I thought about the power bill tucked inside my wallet, the water bill I'd settled online just that morning, the receipt for the week's groceries, still wadded up in the pocket of my coat. I thought about the mortgage payment I'd helped them cover last month when my father's freelance marketing projects had gone dry yet again. All of it. Every cent. Every hour of sleep I had sacrificed just spun in a nauseating vortex in my head. My mother produced a sharp, frantic laugh. I knew that sound intimately. It was the sound of a hairline crack spreading across a frozen lake. "Oh, Robert, don't be like that," she said, her gaze flickering anxiously between him and me. "It's Christmas. Stop joking around." "It's not a joke, Susan," he snapped, his eyes never leaving mine. Sophie's face had drained of all color. Her fork, laden with mashed potatoes, was frozen in her hand. She just gawked at our father, her mouth agape in pure shock. She was the chosen one, the one who was shielded from this side of him. She was the child they had wanted, the easy one. I was the difficult one, the one whose presence was a constant reminder of their own shortcomings. A low hum started in my ears. It grew steadily, a roaring tide that drowned out the cheerful Christmas carols coming from the Bluetooth speaker on the counter. It was the sound of my own heart beating frantically. I could feel a hot flush rising up my neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap up and itemize every bill, every payment, every single time I had carried them, every sacrifice I had made so we could have this one picture-perfect Christmas evening. I wanted to hurl the plate of food I had bought right at his smug face. But I didn't. because in that single clarifying moment, something inside me finally fractured. It wasn't a messy, shattering sound. It was a clean, quiet snap. The piece of me that had spent years clawing for their affection, the part that clung to the hope of a simple thank you or a nod of acknowledgement, just disintegrated. It turned to ash and was gone. And in its place was calm. A cold, unnerving, liberating calm. He had finally said the secret part out loud. He had given me the unvarnished truth. He didn't see a daughter. He saw a line item on a budget he was tired of pretending to appreciate. He saw me as a utility he was finished using. I set my own fork down, placing it neatly beside my plate. I met his gaze, my own now steady. The humming in my ears ceased. The room snapped back into sharp focus. The half-eaten meal, the hollow cheer of the tinsel, the stunned expression on my sister's face, the raw panic in my mother's eyes. I saw it all with a brutal clarity. "Okay," I said. My voice was soft. So soft they all leaned in a fraction to hear it. There was no shouting, no tears. I would not give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble. All I gave him was that one simple word of agreement. Okay. It was a promise. It was a final judgment. It was the sound of a heavy door swinging shut for good. I stood from the table, my chair making a quiet scrape against the wooden floor. No one moved. My father just glared at me with that same frozen expression, as if daring me to make a scene. My mother looked as if she wanted to merge with the floral wallpaper. Sophie's eyes were wide and glistening with tears she refused to let fall. I walked out of the dining room and made my way up the stairs to my bedroom. My steps were even, controlled. The hallway walls were a gallery of family memories, mostly of Sophie, Sophie's first day of kindergarten, Sophie at a ballet recital, Sophie smiling on some sunny beach. There was one picture of me, a rigid school photo from the 6th grade where I had an awkward, forced smile and a terrible haircut. I'd always been a footnote in my own family story. My room was small, the same one I'd had my entire life. The walls were a pale pink, a color I despised. I'd wanted to paint them a cool gray for years, but my mother insisted it was too depressing. The twin bed was shoved against one wall, adorned with a quilt my grandmother had sewn before she passed. It was the only object in the entire house that felt like it truly belonged to me. I didn't bother with the overhead light. I just clicked on the little lamp on my nightstand and dragged my largest suitcase out from the depths of my closet. It was worn and battered from the one and only vacation I'd ever taken, a road trip to the coast with my best friend Jenna after we graduated from high school. It was the last time I'd felt genuinely free. I packed in total silence. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath around me, the tension palpable in the air. The walls that had once represented my entire universe now felt like they were constricting, crushing me with the weight of unspoken grudges and ceaseless demands. I could hear my parents' voices drifting up from downstairs, a low, muffled argument. Susan's voice was high and pleading. Robert's was a steady, angry drone. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was all too familiar. He was digging in his heels. He would never admit he was wrong. I folded my scrubs, my jeans, the few decent sweaters I owned. I packed my toiletries, my dog-eared copy of a favorite novel, the small shoebox of letters Jenna and I had exchanged during college. I moved with a methodical, robotic precision. I wasn't thinking, just acting. If I let myself stop to think, I knew the floodgates would open, and I couldn't allow that. Not here, not in this house. There was a gentle knock on the door. "Clara?" Sophie's voice was a whisper. "It's open," I said, not looking up from zipping a side compartment on the suitcase. She slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Her eyes were puffy and red. She was gripping her phone as if it were a talisman. "You're not serious," she said, her voice trembling. "You're actually leaving?" I finally looked at her. My little sister. The one I had practically raised, the one I loved more than anyone else on earth, even when she was an unwitting part of the very system that was suffocating me. He told me to, I said simply. He's just in a bad mood. He didn't mean it, she insisted, stepping closer. They can't do this. You pay for everything. The internet, the power bill. Mom doesn't even know the password to the cable account. A bitter smile flickered across my lips. Not anymore, I said. I stood the suitcase upright on its wheels. It was heavy, my entire life crammed into one bag. He said, I'm a liability, so I'm taking my liability elsewhere. That isn't true, and you know it, she whispered, tears finally escaping and running down her face. What are we going to do? The we hit me like a physical blow. For so long, my entire existence had been defined by we, what we needed, how we were going to manage. I had never once paused to ask what I needed. I went to her and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. Her skin was so smooth. She still seemed like a child to me. You'll figure it out, I said, but the words felt like a lie. I had no idea if she would. I had no idea if any of them would. But I knew, with a certainty that was chilling, that it was no longer my problem to solve. Sophie shook her head, pulling back. A flicker of something hard, something I'd seen in our father, crossed her face. It was startling. You're going to regret this, she whispered. It wasn't a warning. It was a judgment. As if I were the one lighting the match, not the one fleeing the inferno. I gave her a small, trembling smile. The first genuine emotion I'd let show since dinner. It was a smile born of pure, unadulterated pain. Maybe, I replied, my voice barely a breath, but not as much as staying. I grabbed my purse and the handle of the suitcase. I didn't take the quilt. I didn't take any old pictures. I left the ghost of the girl who used to live in that room behind. As I walked past Sophie, she didn't move. She just stood there, crying in the middle of my rapidly emptying room. The digital clock on my car's dashboard glowed, 4:17 a.m. The world outside was black and motionless, cloaked in that profound, cold quiet that exists only in the hours before dawn. I hadn't slept. After leaving my room, I'd sat in the dark of the living room, listening to the house creak and groan. My father had stomped off to bed, slamming his bedroom door behind him. My mother had clattered around downstairs for a while, washing dishes with loud, passive-aggressive clinks before she, too, retreated upstairs. I heard her muffled sobs through the floorboards. I felt nothing. Now, standing in the driveway, the freezing air nipped at my face, making my eyes water. I hoisted my suitcase into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan, the car I'd bought myself, the car I was still making payments on. Each movement felt heavy with finality. I shut the trunk, and the soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silent street. I slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, I picked up my phone. Its screen cast a ghostly blue light onto my face. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened the folder on my home screen simply labeled Household. One by one, I began to dismantle the life I'd been propping up for them. First, the power company. I navigated their clunky website to the cancel service page. Reason for cancellation? I typed, moving. Effective date? I chose today. A pop-up materialized. Are you sure you want to proceed? This action cannot be undone. I tapped confirm. A surge of something wild and exhilarating washed over me. It tasted like freedom. Next was the internet. I logged into the provider's online portal and followed the prompts to terminate the account. Then the water. The city's website was even more archaic, but I found the correct form. Account holder name? Clara Evans. Not for much longer. Click, Netflix, Hulu. The Amazon Prime account my mother used for nearly all her shopping. Every single one of these accounts was in my name, tied to my bank. I had been the one to set them all up years ago, when my father's credit was in ruins and my mother claimed she was too technologically challenged to handle it. It had just been easier that way, easier for them. With each tap on the screen, I felt another cord snap. I was severing them. Not just from my finances, but from me. There would be no note left on the kitchen table, no tearful, dramatic text message, no warning at all. They hadn't earned one. My father's words were all the warning I needed. You're a liability. Fine. A liability doesn't leave a forwarding address. By the time the first sliver of gray light bled across the horizon, I was finished. I put my phone down, took one last deep breath of the frigid air, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life, and I reversed out of the driveway without a single glance in the rearview mirror at the dark, silent house. The drive south was a long, hazy blur. The highway was deserted, just me and a handful of semi-trucks. I put on a playlist Jenna had made me back in college, filled with loud, angry songs by women who screamed about betrayal and rebirth. I cranked the volume until the car door vibrated. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't have to worry about waking anyone up. 3 hours later, I was parked outside Jenna's apartment building, an old brick structure in a slightly scruffy but vibrant part of the city. I sent her a single text message: "I'm here." A moment later, the front door of the building buzzed, unlocking for me. I dragged my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs. When she opened her door, she didn't bombard me with questions. She just wrapped me in a hug. Jenna was tiny, but her hugs were powerful, as if she could physically wring the pain out of you. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, her voice muffled in my hair. Her apartment was cluttered. A mountain of mail was piled on the entryway console. Her dog, an overenthusiastic beagle mix named Moose, started barking and jumping on my legs. The whole place had the faint aroma of burnt coffee. The sofa in her living room dipped in the middle, its cushions worn flat over the years. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Jenna poured me a cup of coffee. It was, as expected, burnt, and I sat on that lumpy sofa with Moose attempting to lick my face off while she sat on the rug in front of me, just watching, letting me exist in the silence. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt safe. For 3 days, there was quiet, a bizarre, unnerving, glorious quiet. I slept on Jenna's lumpy sofa, and I slept more deeply than I had in ages. I woke up not to the sound of my mother's pointed sighs or my father's angry stomping, but to the gentle thump of Moose's tail against a coffee table leg. Jenna and I ordered greasy pizza, binged mindless reality TV, and talked about nothing and everything. I didn't give her the play-by-play of Christmas night. Not yet. I just told her I needed to get away, and she accepted it without question. My phone stayed on silent, screen down on the coffee table. I knew it was a time bomb. On the 3rd day, it detonated. It began buzzing non-stop, vibrating so violently it danced across the wood surface. I picked it up. The screen was a solid wall of notifications, 7 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, which was a surprise, and a flood of panicked texts from Sophie. I scrolled through them, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. Sophie, Clara, where are you? Mom is losing it. Sophie, seriously, answer your phone. This isn't funny. Sophie, Dad is yelling at Mom. You need to call her. Sophie, Clara, please, just tell us you're okay. The most recent message sent only a few minutes ago was different. Sophie, the power's out. The internet is down. Dad is going crazy. I almost laughed, a real, actual laugh, sharp and devoid of humor. Of course he was. The world that hummed along so perfectly without any effort on his part was beginning to fall apart. Just then, the phone began to ring again. It was my mother. For reasons I couldn't explain, I answered it. Maybe I needed to hear the confirmation for myself. Maybe I just wanted the satisfaction. Clara. Her voice was thin and reedy with panic. Oh, thank God, Clara, something's wrong. The lights, everything is off, the internet, the television, nothing is working. I tried calling the power company, but they have all these confusing automated menus. And the bills, I cut her off. My voice was calm, level, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was like I was listening to someone else speak. I stopped paying them, I said. Silence. Not just a pause, but a complete hollow vacuum on the other end of the line. I could hear her shaky, shallow breathing. I could picture her standing there in the dark kitchen, her face a mask of confusion. Then she spoke again, her voice a fragile whisper. The question that confirmed everything I already knew. The question that sealed her fate and my freedom. You paid for those? The sheer, honest ignorance in her voice was breathtaking. For all these years, how did she imagine the lights stayed on? Did she think some kind of magical bill-paying fairy visited every month? Or did she simply make the conscious choice not to see, because seeing would require gratitude? Seeing would mean acknowledging that her 25-year-old daughter was the one keeping their heads above water. "Who else did you think was paying for them, Mom?" I asked. The question was quiet, but it was loaded with the weight of 1,000 invisible sacrifices. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to. Her question was the only answer that mattered. I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. Click. I blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's. I left Sophie's for now. That one felt different, harder. Jenna looked over at me from the kitchen, her expression full of concern. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, the first full, cleansing breath I'd taken in 3 days. "Yeah," I said, and I was surprised to realize it was the truth. "I think I am." I braced myself for the next stage to be a campaign of emotional warfare. Guilt-laden voicemails from my mother, angry texts, maybe even a dramatic appeal from Sophie. I was ready for that. I'd spent my entire life navigating their emotional minefields. What I did not anticipate was retaliation. The next morning, as I was nursing another cup of Jenna's awful coffee, my phone buzzed with a new kind of alert. It was an email from my bank. Subject: Security Alert. A recent login to your account was made from a new device. A cold dread washed through me, instantly curdling the coffee in my stomach. The device location was listed as my hometown, my old family desktop computer. He was trying to get into my bank account. A minute later, another notification, this time from my credit card company. Suspicious password reset attempt. Then another from my primary email. He was systematically trying to claw his way back into my life, to reclaim the control he had lost. The initial shock quickly hardened into a cold, protective rage. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a violation. My phone rang. It was Sophie. I answered instantly. "He's losing it," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. I could hear a rustling sound in the background, like she was hiding in her closet. "Clara, Dad's on your old computer. He's been on it for hours." "I know," I said grimly, staring at the alerts flooding my phone. "My bank is blowing up my email. He's using that notebook Mom kept." Sophie rushed on, her voice cracking. "The little blue one? With all your old passwords and security questions from when you first got an email account." I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered that notebook. My mother had started it for me when I was a teenager as a place to keep track of important information. My first email password, the answer to my security question, "What was the name of your first pet?" It was all in there, written in her neat, looping cursive. What had once seemed like a gesture of maternal care was now being weaponized against me. It was a catalog of all my vulnerabilities, compiled by my own mother and handed to my father. "Tell him he's wasting his time," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "I changed all of those passwords years ago. He can't get in. I had updated everything when I got my first job out of college, migrating everything to a secure password manager. Thank God for small mercies." Sophie was quiet for a moment. I could only hear her ragged breathing. "He's not thinking rationally, Clara. He keeps saying you've ruined them. He's screaming that you stole from him, that all the money in your bank account is his because you lived under his roof." The logic was so warped, so profoundly narcissistic, that it nearly took my breath away. In his mind, my income was his asset. My entire existence was a service I owed him. My departure wasn't an act of self-preservation, it was theft. My chest tightened, not with fear for myself, but for Sophie. She was trapped in that house with him, with his rage spiraling out of control. "Sophie, listen to me," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Is your bedroom door locked?" "Yes," she whispered. "Keep it locked. Do not go near him. If he tries anything, and I mean anything, if he starts yelling at you, if he tries to get into your room, if you feel unsafe for even 1 second, you call me. You hang up and you call me immediately. Do you understand?" "Okay," she squeaked. "I'm serious, Soph. Don't try to manage him. Don't try to calm him down. That is not your job. It had always been my job, but no longer. Now all I could do was try to shield my sister from the fallout of the blaze I had finally stopped trying to extinguish. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. He wasn't just angry, he was becoming unhinged. And I had a sinking feeling that he wasn't going to stay behind a computer screen for much longer. 3 more nights passed in a tense, fragile peace. The security alerts on my phone had ceased. I'd spent hours online, enabling 2-factor authentication on every account I could, generating new passwords that were long, nonsensical strings of characters. I was constructing a digital fortress. In the quiet moments, I helped Jenna repaint her bathroom, the smell of lavender-scented paint masking the faint aroma of burnt coffee. We were a team. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a partnership, not just a one-woman support crew. I was starting to believe I could actually carve out a new life, that the ghosts of my old one couldn't reach me here. We were on the sofa, watching some mindless baking show on TV and sharing a bowl of popcorn when the sound came. It wasn't a knock, it was a slam, a heavy, violent pounding that seemed to vibrate through the entire apartment. Jenna and I both jumped, popcorn flying across the floor. Moose, the beagle, shot up from his dog bed and began barking wildly at the door. Another slam, harder this time. Boom, boom, boom. It was the sound of pure, unbridled fury. Jenna muted the TV, her eyes wide with terror. "Are you expecting anyone?" she whispered, already knowing the answer. I didn't have to guess. I knew. A cold, heavy certainty settled in my gut. He'd found me. The digital fortress hadn't been enough. He had come to tear down the physical one. "Clara, I know you're in there. Open this door." My father's voice. It was a roar, muffled and distorted by the thick wood of the door, but it was him. It was the same voice that had called me a liability, now bellowing in the hallway of my sanctuary, turning it into a cage. "Don't answer it," Jenna breathed, grabbing my arm. Her hand was shaking. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. The fisheye lens twisted his face into a grotesque mask of rage. His skin was mottled and red. His fists were clenched by his sides. And his eyes were wild, unhinged. This was not the quietly cruel man from the Christmas dinner table. This was a man who had completely lost control. This was a man who looked dangerous. I stepped back from the door, my own fear a cold knot in my throat. But beneath the fear was that same strange calm that had washed over me in the dining room. This was not a family argument. This was a threat, and I knew exactly how to deal with a threat. "Call the cops," I said to Jenna. My voice was steady, even though my heart was pounding against my ribs. "What?" "Call 911. "Now," I repeated, my eyes fixed on the door, which shuddered again from another blow. Jenna fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Outside, the shouting continued, a tirade of accusations and demands. "You owe us. You don't just get to walk away and leave us with nothing. Everything you have is because of us. You ungrateful little bitch." His words were meant to wound me, to shame me back into line, but they didn't. All they did was reaffirm that I had made the only possible choice. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a possession, an asset that had gone rogue. I could hear Jenna's hushed, panicked voice on the phone with the dispatcher. My friend's father. He's trying to break down the door. Yes, 3B. Please hurry. It felt like an eternity passed, but it was probably less than 2 minutes. The pounding stopped abruptly. I heard new voices in the hallway, firm and authoritative. "Sir, you need to step away from the door. She's in there. She owes me," my father yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Sir, put your hands behind your back." I risked another glance through the peephole. 2 police officers had him, one on each arm, pinning him against the opposite wall. The hallway was suddenly painted in strobing red and blue light from the stairwell window. As they cuffed him, my father twisted his head, his wild eyes trying to find the peephole, as if he could see me through it. "You'll regret this, Clara," he shouted, his voice echoing down the hall as they led him away. "You'll regret turning your back on your family." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Jenna came and stood beside me, placing a comforting hand on my back. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just listened to his voice fade away down the stairs until the only sound left was Moose, whining softly at my feet. He was wrong. I wouldn't regret this. This was the first decision I had ever made that I knew, with absolute certainty, I would never, ever regret. The arrest provided a few days of quiet. A restraining order was filed. My father was released on bail with a strict warning to stay away from me. I knew a piece of paper wouldn't hold him for long, but it was a legal boundary, a line in the sand that I could now enforce. It felt like progress. I started searching for my own apartment, a small studio, anything that was mine and mine alone. I was trying to move forward, to build a life where I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. My stomach clenched every time her name appeared, torn between my love for her and the toxic world she still inhabited. "Sophie, I'm so sorry about Dad. Are you okay?" Me? "I'm fine. Are you okay?" Sophie, "He's not here. He stayed at a friend's." "But Clara, Mom's acting weird. She's been cleaning out your room and the garage." A new kind of alarm went off inside me. It wasn't about physical safety, but something almost more violating. Me. "What do you mean cleaning them out?" A picture message came through. It was a photo of the back of my old sedan parked in the driveway. The trunk was open, and inside were my old camera bag and my laptop case. My blood ran cold. The next text confirmed my worst fear. "Sophie, she's selling your stuff. She said you abandoned it. She's taking it to the pawn shop downtown. The car, too. She found the spare key." Rage, pure and white-hot, surged through me. That car was my independence. That laptop contained my college papers, my photos, my entire digital life. That camera was the one extravagant thing I'd ever bought for myself, a hobby that gave me a small measure of peace. They weren't just objects, they were mine. And my mother, my own mother, was stealing them. "I have to go," I said to Jenna, grabbing my keys. "Clara, wait. Is it safe?" "I don't care," I snapped, my voice tight with fury. "She is not getting away with this." The drive back to my hometown was fueled by adrenaline and a sense of righteous anger. This was so much worse than my father's desperate attempts to hack my bank accounts. This was a calculated act of theft and betrayal by the one person who was supposed to protect me. I pulled up to the house. The sight of it, with its tidy lawn and welcoming blue door, made me feel sick. My mother was on the front porch, sorting through a box of my old books. She looked up as my car door slammed shut, her face immediately hardening into a defensive mask. She wasn't just holding the key to my car. She was holding the title. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You know why I'm here," I said, walking straight up to her. I stopped at the base of the porch steps, putting myself on her level. "You stole my car, Mom?" She actually scoffed. The sound was so dismissive, so utterly devoid of remorse, it was staggering. "Don't be so dramatic. It was sitting in the driveway. You weren't using it. You abandoned it when you abandoned us. It is registered in my name. I make the payments on it. It is legally my property. Give me the key and the title," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "No," she said, crossing her arms defiantly. "You don't deserve it. Not after what you did. You called the cops on your father, your own father." "He tried to break down my door," I shot back, my voice finally rising. "You are stealing from me. Do you not see how insane this is? I'm your mother." "You don't get to speak to me that way," she said, her eyes flashing. "We needed the money you should have been giving us." I just stared at her, at the complete, unshakable victimhood in her eyes. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my property, to my life. She believed I was the one who was wrong. In that moment, I knew there was nothing left to save. No relationship, no flicker of maternal instinct. It was all gone, burned away by their bottomless greed and selfishness. My rage cooled, replaced once again by that chilling, absolute clarity. I pulled out my phone. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you calling? Sophie? To tattle on me?" "No," I said calmly, my thumb hovering over the dial pad. I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm calling 911. Her face went slack with shock, then crumpled into disbelief. "You wouldn't." I dialed the first number. 9. "Clara, stop it. This is ridiculous." I dialed the second. 1. "You can't do this to me. I'm your mother," she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch as she finally grasped that I was serious. I dialed the last number. 1. And pressed call. 911. "What is your emergency?" Keeping my eyes locked on my mother's horrified face, I spoke clearly into the phone. "I'd like to report a vehicle theft. My name is Clara Evans. The person who stole it is my mother, Susan Evans, and she's standing right in front of me." I didn't shed a single tear as the police car, the second one to visit this cursed house in less than a week, pulled up to the curb. I didn't cry as they escorted my mother, sobbing and protesting, to the back of the cruiser. Neighbors were peeking through their blinds, their curtains twitching. Let them look. Let the whole world see the truth of this picture-perfect family on this quiet suburban street. My mother had screamed, "You can't do this to me." But as I stood on the porch, holding the key and title to my car, I knew the truth. You already did this to yourself. The fallout from my mother's arrest was swift and ugly. My father, now facing his own legal troubles, bailed her out within hours. My brief moment of victory felt hollow, replaced by a gnawing dread. I hadn't just called their bluff. I had declared all-out war. I had taken something from them that they could understand, their public image, their pretense of being a normal, respectable family, and I knew they would never forgive me for it. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It contained only 5 words. "You are going to regret this." There was no question who it was from. The threat was no longer wild and shouted in a hallway. It was cold, quiet, and delivered directly to my pocket. It felt infinitely more dangerous. I blocked the number, but I couldn't block the fear that was beginning to coil in my stomach. I was staying at Jenna's again, but her apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a target. My phone rang. It was Sophie. I answered on the first ring. "Clara?" she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely make out her words. She was crying. "He's out. Dad bailed her out this morning. I know, Soph. I figured he would. Are you okay?" "No," she choked out. "He's here. They're both here. They're screaming at each other about you." He said, "Oh God, Clara. He said he's coming for you. He said he's going to finish this." The world seemed to tilt. Finish this? What did that even mean? The ambiguity was terrifying. "He just got in his car," she sobbed. "He's leaving. I think he's coming to your friend's place. You have to get out of there. Please, Clara, go somewhere." But I wasn't going to run. Not again. I had run once, and he had followed. This time, I would stand my ground. But my first thought was of Sophie. "No, Sophie. You need to get out of there. Now, pack a bag. Just the important things. I'm coming to get you." "What?" "No, Clara, don't. He'll see you. There are still police stationed outside your house because of the restraining order, right?" I asked, my mind racing. After my mother's arrest, the police had promised to keep a patrol car nearby for a few days. Yes, but no buts. Pack your bag. I'll be there in 3 hours. We're getting you out. I'll call the local police and inform them I'm coming to retrieve my sister and my remaining property, and that I have a restraining order against my father. I hung up before she could argue. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was crystal clear. I couldn't build a new life for myself while my sister was a hostage in that war zone. The drive was the longest 3 hours of my life. I called the police dispatcher as I drove, explaining the situation in a calm, flat voice. They assured me the officer on duty would be aware of my arrival. When I pulled onto my old street, the sight of the patrol car parked across from the house was the only thing that kept my heart from hammering out of my chest. Sophie must have been watching from the window, because the moment I parked, she ran out the front door. She threw 2 duffel bags into my back seat and jumped in the passenger side, her face pale and streaked with tears. "He's not back yet," she said breathlessly. "Let's just go." "Not yet," I said, my jaw tight. "He doesn't get to scare us away." I got out of the car and walked with Sophie back into the house one last time. We moved quickly, grabbing her laptop, her most treasured books, a box of photos. Every sound from outside made us jump, and then it happened. Headlights flooded the driveway, sweeping across the living room wall. My father's truck pulled in, blocking my car. He climbed out, his face a thundercloud. He saw me, and for a split second, he looked surprised. Then his expression curdled into pure loathing. He started walking towards us, his fists clenched. "You think you're better than us?" he spat, his voice low and menacing as he reached the porch where Sophie and I stood frozen. I pushed Sophie behind me. I looked at the man who was my father, this stranger filled with poison, and I felt the last lingering bit of fear inside me burn away, leaving only a hard, cold core of strength. "I know I am," I said, my voice steady and clear. It was the truth. It was the simplest, most profound truth of my life. And I had finally said it to his face. His eyes widened in fury. He took a step forward, raising his hand, and in that instant, I wasn't sure what he intended to do. But he never got the chance. The officer from the patrol car was suddenly there, a solid, uniformed presence stepping between us. "Sir, that's close enough," the officer said, his voice calm but unyielding. "You're in violation of a restraining order. Leave the premises. Now." My father stared at me over the officer's shoulder, his eyes burning with a look of such profound hatred, it was almost pitiful. He had lost. He had lost his power, his control, his victim, and he knew it. Without another word, he turned, got back in his truck, and drove away into the night. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Some wounds aren't supposed to heal. They're supposed to scar over to serve as a permanent reminder of what you survived. The 2 years that followed were not about healing. They were about rebuilding. I got that studio apartment. It was tiny, with a kitchen that was little more than a closet and a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. Every square inch of it was my sanctuary. I changed my phone number, I deleted all my social media and started new, private accounts under a variation of my name. I cut every last tie, snipping the final frayed threads that connected me to Robert and Susan. Sophie lived with me and Jenna for the rest of her senior year of high school. It was crowded and chaotic, but it was safe. She got a part-time job and started seeing a therapist. She slowly began to untangle the years of guilt and obligation that had been woven into her DNA. She learned that she was not responsible for her parents' happiness. She learned that she was allowed to have her own life. I never spoke to my parents again. I never had to. They were ghosts, figures from a past life that no longer had any claim on me. 2 years after that final ugly confrontation in the driveway, Sophie turned 20. She'd been accepted to a state university 4 hours away. On a hot, sunny August morning, I helped her pack up my little sedan. She didn't have much, just 2 duffel bags and a few boxes of books. But everything she had was her own, earned and chosen. We drove to her college, the windows down, singing along badly to the radio. The campus was beautiful, full of old brick buildings and huge, shady oak trees. We found her dorm room, a tiny cinder-block-walled space that she would share with a stranger. It smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. As we unpacked her things, laying her new comforter on the narrow bed and stacking her textbooks on the small desk, a feeling of profound peace settled over me. We had made it. We were here. When the last box was empty, Sophie turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. She threw her arms around me, hugging me so tight it almost hurt. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered into my shoulder, "for everything." I held her just as tight, my own throat thick with emotion. I pulled back and looked at her, my smart, resilient, wonderful sister, standing on the precipice of her own life, a life she would get to build entirely for herself. "You're free now," I whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. Sophie laughed, a beautiful, watery sound. She wiped her own eyes and looked at me, a wide, genuine smile spreading across her face. "So are you," she said. And in that small, empty dorm room, surrounded by the promise of a future we had fought for, I knew she was right. In the end, my parents lost everything. It didn't happen with a bang, but with a slow, inevitable collapse. Without my income propping up their finances, the unpaid bills mounted. The house they were so proud of, the one they had kicked me out of, went into foreclosure 6 months after I left. My father's freelance work was too sporadic, and my mother had never held a job in her adult life. Their arrests had made them notorious in our small town, their reputation ruined. No one wanted to hire the angry man whose family drama was now public knowledge. They drifted. They moved into a cheap apartment in the next town over, then another one after that. Sophie heard from them occasionally, desperate, rambling voicemails left on her birthday or holidays. A few times, letters addressed to me arrived at Jenna's old apartment, forwarded by the post office. They were written in my mother's handwriting, the envelopes thin and cheap with no return address. They were filled with pleas for forgiveness, for money, for a connection they themselves had severed. I never opened them. I threw them away, unopened, into the trash. There was nothing they could say that would matter. Forgiveness was a currency they hadn't earned, and one I no longer carried. Some nights, when the city is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator in my small kitchen, I remember that Christmas dinner. I can still smell the ham and the pine. I can still see the cruel, dismissive smirk on my father's face as he pronounced his sentence on me. "You're a liability, Clara." The words don't sting anymore. They hang in my memory not as an insult, but as a diagnosis of his own blindness. He had never seen the truth. He had never understood that the person he was casting out was the only thing holding his fragile world together. I was never the liability. I was the backbone. I look around my quiet apartment, at the life I built with my own 2 hands, a life filled with peace and real chosen love. It's not a grand life, but it's an honest one, and it is mine. They made their choice, I say softly to the empty room, and I made mine. End of story.